Okay, we need somebody watching the Facebook feed, and we need somebody watching the Instagram feed. So, and then is there a place on here I add participants?
Yeah, there's. I think there was someone who already requested.
Yeah.
So.
Okay, awesome. So, welcome Sandra, welcome Nahimi. Glad you guys are joining us. I hope you can.
Oh, you have to switch it around.
You can see us. And I think I'm gonna put this one on
the
mute.
screen, because you're gonna face it towards Pastor, or what? Where you put it?
Yeah.
We're getting situated still
There you
over
go.
here.
So you want? Okay.
Awesome. Okay,
And
let
then
me
just
like
go live.
this. Okay.
Is that Facebook?
Awesome.
Mine's Instagram.
Oh, that's right.
So we are connecting. We have Facebook, we have Instagram, and that's right there.
Yeah.
And we have Zoom. Awesome, awesome, awesome. Okay, can you all hear me on the Zoom? I want to make sure that you guys can hear me before we start the discussion. I got a thumbs up. Awesome. So you can hear me. Awesome, awesome, awesome. Okay, so can somebody check the Facebook and monitor the Facebook, church Facebook, and then also the Instagram? And if somebody has a question or wants to communicate with a person to be able to say who it was and what the comment is. As far as on the Zoom here, guys.
I would, but that's.
Okay, so if somebody on Zoom wants to communicate, I suppose what we can do here is I can check the chat. So I got the yes from Sandra Santana. Let me see if there's anybody else that wants
I'll
to.
check YouTube. 'Cause I think
Okay, yeah. Is it live on YouTube as well now?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. So I think we're green light, everybody, on all platforms. Awesome, awesome, awesome. Anthony's jumping in the Zoom. Great. So if you are joining us online, welcome. Glad you're joining us. Our staff is here, and we are eating. We are eating. Take a look. Everyone's over there. They're getting some food, and oh, they can see me on that one. Oh, that's just Zoom. Okay, so they can already see me. But,
Yeah.
oh, and they can see you. Okay, great. Yeah, Brother Gene, how do they see me? Well, we want this to be a wonderful session to add value to each and every one of us. Raise your hand or give me a thumbs up or type yes if you have read or listened to the first 6 chapters of the book. Awesome. All hands in the room. I see thumbs up on Zoom. And it says, Chanel says it's overlapping. Is that just my end? I'm not sure. And I don't know what you mean by overlapping. So perhaps you can clarify that, Chanel. So this has been a great, great book. And I have really benefited tremendously from it. What I'd like to do is I'd like to start with, let's just ask God to bless our conversation. Let's do that. Father, thank you so much for your love to us. Thank you for the opportunity to study boundaries. Help us to be able to say no to things that are out there that should be outside of us and say yes to the good. And so bless this conversation now in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, so let's go chapter by chapter, guys. The first chapter was on a boundaryless life. A boundaryless life. So who has a thought or a comment or an observation that you really took, and maybe it resonated in your heart, where you didn't have boundaries? Boundaryless life look like? Who wants to start in on that? Okay, Andrea.
It really reflected. I felt like that was my life in a lot of ways.
She said it.
Just that lady who just from the morning, from when she woke up into when she went to sleep, it seemed like just everybody was sucking her energy and her time in one way or another, and she never really said no, even with her, I think it was her mother, and then having to wake up early and make a costume for her daughter, and just everything with her boss, and then even with her husband when she got home. Like it just, to me, it resonated with a lot of things that are happening in my life as well. Because it made me realize, wow, man, I don't have any boundaries.
Oh. So this lady just said yes to everything, and you related to that. Anybody else? And as I asked that question online, I'm hearing that there is an echo. Anthony says there's an echo that's taking place. So
Is there sound coming from there and from here?
one, so everything should come from these two. All right. What about on Instagram? We're good. There's no echo. People can hear. I want to find out if you guys can hear when okay, they can't hear when somebody's talking. So I think what I'm going to do is pass my phone.
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll pass my phone when you're talking. Okay, so the boundaryless life. Andrea was saying she felt like that was her in many ways. Does anybody else want to speak into that where you're just saying yes to everything and you're just, okay, so I'm going to pass my phone all the way over to Amy. So bring that over to her and that'll be great.
One of the points that they made in it is that by doing those things, you seem like you're being nice. And they said being nice is not a boundary. And so one of them says what it's not. Trying hard isn't working. Being nice isn't working. Taking care of others isn't working. And all those things is like, well, I want to pride myself in taking care of somebody. I want to pride myself in being nice and trying hard. But it's not benefiting me to exuberate myself, to be nice, just to do that when it's setting a pattern of having no boundaries. And so that was something that's like, oh, it's really 20%.
Yeah. Go ahead, Gene. Pass it to Gene. He wants to say something.
For me, boundaries doesn't apply just to me, it applies to other people. And one of the things as I was listening to that book, I was thinking about my daughter Nancy and her husband Daniel, how they just do so much for our kids. They love them, they take them places, they take them to eat. And I just want them to know that, to never feel like they have to do it and they're obligated to do it. Just want them to know that it's appreciated. So I want that boundary to go back to them, that they can know, hey Dad, we don't want to do that. Or if the kids call and say, hey, can you do this for us? I want them to say, no, we're not gonna be able to do that and not have to feel guilty. So I know that they love doing that stuff, but I want them to know from my heart that everything's appreciated and whatever they do is just out of the kindness of their heart. And so I'm very thankful for it.
That's great. So when you're thinking about a boundaryless life, I think there's good responsibility on both ends, right? Because we learned the law of responsibility. Okay, thank you. That it's both having boundaries for yourself, but also loving your neighbor as yourself as well, and making sure that if you know somebody's saying yes to everything all the time, being able to maybe not put the ask out, or give them permission, or give them the ability to say no in advance. Like, hey, I'm going to throw this out to you, but I want you to know if you say no to this and you have a boundary on this, I respect that boundary and your personal space. So does anybody on the Zoom have anything to comment or quote or anything you want to add in? Feel free to unmute yourself, and I'll just turn the camera around if you want to add anything on this chapter 1, a boundaryless life. Give you a few seconds and I'll be able to hear you. Or you can make a comment on or if anybody on Instagram. Okay, go ahead, Daniel. You need to take this. And if somebody can monitor Instagram and YouTube and Facebook, if somebody has a quote or a thought, let's make sure we can let them do that. Daniel, you have a little bit of food on the left side of your face. Oh, a little further right there. Yes.
Should I pull a Biden and eat it?
No.
I'm just kidding. Thank you for that, Pastor. I think one of the first parts that stood out to me in the book was when it was talking the difference between burden and the load. How many times we can have these different things in life and we feel like it's a burden and that we need other people to carry it, but oftentimes it's a load. And we can, sometimes when we go through the different boulders and struggles and trials in life, we can often think to ourselves, okay, Like, is this something I share with someone, or is it something I hold back? Like, I don't want to share with them because I don't want to be a burden, but sometimes it is something that you should be sharing. So very briefly, he says that boundaries, those are kind of like boulders where they're too heavy to carry. So it could be like a family trauma or something, or whatever the case may be, where it's just too heavy for you to carry by yourself, and you need prayer, you need help from other people. But a load is something like I think he said, it's like cargo. It's our daily responsibility that we have, that we should be doing ourselves. So just think to yourself, maybe if you have something in your life, like, is this a boulder that's too heavy for me to carry and I need to reach out and ask for help? Or is it just daily cargo where, like, I can do it by myself?
It's a good differentiation for sure when you think about it, because there's some things that they're ours. You're not supposed to give that to somebody else. In Galatians 6, it talks about, like, bear your own burden, right? And then there's another verse that says, like what you said, like, bear one another's burden. So sometimes it's challenging, isn't it? To, like, okay, what's mine and what's theirs, and should I feel guilty for saying no to somebody else's burden when it's their knapsack to carry, you know? And so it's how to do that. Does anybody remember the illustration that he brought up in the book that spoke about the Good Samaritan, that he was boundaryless? Who wants to speak into that and kind of summarize that a little bit? You want to do it, Misty? Okay, go ahead and take that.
Well, he was just talking about the importance of boundaries, and he said he kind of made an example. He kind of stepped out from what the Bible story was, and he said if the Good Samaritan had not had boundaries, he said say the man woke up, the injured man woke up and was like, "Where are you going? Why are you leaving? What are you doing?" And he was like, "Well, I've got business to attend to." "No, stay here with me. Stay here with me. Don't leave me." And so the Good Samaritan then, if he didn't have any boundaries, he would have stayed there with him. And then, 3 days later, he gets a message from his business partner saying, "Hey, we ended up selling the camels to another buyer. Sorry, you missed out," or whatever. And so he needed those boundaries in place as a Good Samaritan to be able to still take care of the injured man, but tend to his business as well.
Yes, that's phenomenal. How many of you guys have, you started helping somebody doing good, and you felt good about it, and then something happened, you developed maybe a savior complex, whereby you got so much gratification on helping them, and it created that codependency. And then when they asked for more, you felt like you couldn't say no. And then it was exploited through maybe either guilt, "Oh, you're a Christian and now you're doing this." Sometimes people do that, "Oh, you're a pastor and you're not helping me." Well, yeah, I'm a pastor, and the way I'm helping you is by saying no, and get a J-O-B, if a man doesn't work, neither shall he eat, And so, but people will use fear, they'll use guilt, they'll use manipulation, they'll try to control us. And so we don't want to fall into that trap of being boundaryless. And sometimes even in Christianity, people will make you try to feel bad because you have money. I think about the Good Samaritan. He couldn't have helped that lady unless he had boundaries. And so if there's no boundaries around your finances, I always tell people, listen, get to an emergency fund. Like, save $1,000, pay off your debt, develop the ability to say no to yourself so that you can say yes to yourself later on good things. And so this Good Samaritan, he had boundaries, and he could serve out of that overflow. Is there anybody else that wants to add to the maybe an experience or a quote or a thought in the book where in chapter 1, living that boundaryless life, perhaps maybe coming home, working all day, and maybe letting somebody else into your house when it's time for you to give quality time to your children or your spouse, and maybe the mother-in-law, the dreaded, well, not mine, I have a great mother-in-law, but the mother-in-law or the father-in-law, and it's like the principle of leave and cleave is no longer existent anymore, and now it's like the family boundaries from how you grew up is still a cohabitation taking place, and it's hard for you to say no, and now it's kind of intruding into the family. Or any circumstances or scenarios that you guys can think of, want to speak into? Nate's got one. There we go. We haven't heard from Nate yet.
Yeah, so I was investing into a family when I was single, and I was picking up some kids from school and taking them to the park and stuff afterwards. And I began to date my wife, who was just my girlfriend at the time, and I began to date her, and I couldn't be dating her and picking those kids up from school. And I'll never forget that there was one of the kids got really bitter and upset at me for choosing uh, my girlfriend over them, and they didn't realize the stage of life that I was in, that I was trying to progress and get married and start my own family. And so there was a lot of bitterness that was coming from them towards me, and a lot of anger. So it was just a journey of walking through, and their siblings having to walk through that journey of realizing that it wasn't all about them, but that they had to be thankful for the time that we could be together, but that I had to set some boundaries in my life to say, hey, look, I can't be with you all the time. I want to be a blessing to you when I can, but there's certain times where, hey, I need to focus on my own life and my own family. So that was just a small
That's awesome.
situation there. Yeah.
That's great. I think Misty had something. You want to add
No, I
something?
was just gonna say, when you were talking about coming home, I think I don't know if it was in that chapter, but talking about how we don't set boundaries with like our electronic devices.
Oh, good
There's
point.
times where I've looked around my living room and my kids are all, and me and my husband, and setting those boundaries where we've gone about our day, we've done everything that we need to do throughout the day, and when we have that time together, like it's not just the people in our life we need to have boundaries with, but it's also the electronic devices and those other distractions that are going to take away. One of the things that it said in chapter 1 was, just as physical buildings have walls and boundaries to protect them, we need to have those boundaries to keep the good in and the bad out.
Yes.
That's what
So good. I liked when he said we want the pearls on the inside and the swine on the outside. And he talks about in the book having a fence with gates, fence to separate and delineate, but also a gate so that there could be ingress and egress. I loved your point, Nathan, on I'm taking from it, like, when we're working with people, and people change, and they should change, and we should all be changing all the time, right? To be more and more conformed to the image of Christ. The things that we used to do, we don't do them anymore. That still goes in the sanctification process. And so when you think about this, I love the point you brought up with respecting the seasons of people's life. And the idea is, the kids got upset because they didn't understand the stage of life that you were in. And sometimes I think we can get upset because people's life changes and we fail to pick up, like, no, this is a healthy change for them. And I should want good for them above ministering to my own selfish need. Because if they stay with me for my benefit, when they're going to lose the next step in their own life, we all lose. Because then they're going to stay with me and they're going to resent it. And they don't get what they want. But if they move forward, and I accept their no and their power to say no, and they move forward, then I'm going to move forward too in whatever's supposed to happen to me. And so the concept there is, when there is change and people do have boundaries, those boundaries are not for competition. When somebody says no to us, it's not to compete with us. It's so that they would gain, and we would gain with their gain as well. So that was chapter number 1. So helpful. Has there been any comments on the social media sites, or does anybody on the Zoom have anything that they want to add into this chapter 1 before we go into more of a dialogue into chapter 2? It sounds like all the feedback and the echoing is not happening anymore, so that's good. I'm very happy about that. So great job wherever that came from. Daniel solved it. Created some good boundaries, didn't you? So that there's no echoing back and forth. We do have a good group on Zoom. We got Anthony, Michelle, Chanel. We've got Sandra and Hemi. So we do have a good group on Zoom watching. And I want to thank our media group for putting this together. Anybody on Instagram or Facebook have any comments to add on the boundaryless life? Okay. Okay, so let's go into chapter 2 a little bit. And in chapter 2, it spoke about what does boundaries look like. And I think this is important because when you think about this, if we have boundaries already built into the system that God's created, right from the beginning, He created divisions, right? Light and darkness, the earth and the waters, created differentiation and distinction with the animals and the different kinds, and put Adam and Eve in the garden and to rule and attend it. So, what do boundaries look like? Invisible, visible boundaries, and what did He say some of those things were? Who wants to speak into that? What do boundaries look like? Trevor?
One of the quotes that I got out of the book on when he started talking about what boundaries were, he said that the boundaries define us and define what it tells us what is me and what is not me. And I think it showed because now I know where my boundaries are, you know where I stand in certain places, and you know how I think through things and how I perceive things. So it's just powerful in the fact that setting a boundary does kind of define your beliefs and where you stand on things.
I love it. I love that because God's made us unique and personal with our own DNA and fingerprints, and He talks about how some of the delineations and distinctions of what we are versus others is our skin. And He talks about, oh man, that really gets under my skin when somebody are kind of going a little too far or something. He talks about words, the words that we use, the time, the emotional distance and consequence. But I love what you brought up, Trevor, because there's some things that are not me. I see some of the clothing that people wear today, and I just think that is so not me. Now, I'm happy they get to choose and have their own individual soul liberty.
So Nathan's hat, one of them?
Nathan, yes. Well, he's got the flat, straight bill going up, I'm like, that is not me. Daniel's hat with the curve on it, that's a little more me.
Okay.
Right? Okay. But doesn't it feel good to be able to say, this is me?
Yeah.
This is what I like. This is my preference. But I also appreciate the fact that if you want to look weird, and different, you certainly can. Trevor is shaking his head. Is that what you meant by
Moving on.
More examples.
Yeah, more examples. Does anybody else have anything that you could pull up from some of your, maybe the notes that you took from chapter 2 on what boundaries look like and maybe some of the consequences so you might know or whatever? Okay, Nathan, let's pass that over.
Yeah, there was one quote that stuck out to me, and they said this, that fear of being alone keeps many in hurtful patterns for years. And thinking through the concept there that you can fear not having a relationship, and we're all built for relationships, but if that is if that's where you find your security and your acceptance is only in the relationships around you from human people, that you're going to stay sometimes in a bad relationship because of that fear of not being accepted by another person. And so that fear will really control you and keep you in a pattern that you shouldn't be in, because you didn't set up a boundary in your life, because you didn't value yourself, you didn't value who you are. So
I love that. Go ahead, Pastor Dave. You want to add to it?
There was a part in it where it mentioned emotional distance is a temporary way to give yourself space and distance. Sometimes when you think of emotional distance, or even a distance where they moved away, or you don't see them as often as you should, that you still have a connection to them, and it's just temporary. Don't live in that state of, well, they're gone, I don't need to communicate, I don't need to mend it in such a great way like I would if I saw them on the daily. So that distance still means that it's temporary. Don't live in that state of them being gone, and still mend it and do a great job of it.
Good point. Good point. I think sometimes we can feel like when somebody has a boundary in their life for whatever reason, and they're not there, sometimes we can take that personal, right? And it can, what did I do wrong? And sometimes we did do something wrong, and it needs to be fixed. And then other times they might just need their own private space to recoup and to recover and to renew themselves on where they're at. And so how many of you guys it's challenging for you to be able to say no? Does anybody have a problem saying no? What about like maybe you fellowshipped for a while and it's time for people to leave? Does anybody have a problem saying, hey, it's time to leave? Yeah, I'm not one of those people. What I do when it's time, I look at the clock and I look at where I'm at and I say, all right, everyone. I go to the front door and I say, it's time to leave. and I feel perfectly great about that, just because I value myself and I know I can't give my best energy to others if people are draining me dry all night. So having the ability to say no, and not feeling bad about it, and what helps us to be able to say no is this: when you have a burning yes for something greater, right? So let's say we get somebody has an event or a situation going on, and you have something else. What helps you be able to say no to all these opportunities is when you have a burning yes for something deeper on the inside that you're committed to, and then to be able to say to them, "Listen, I appreciate the invite, or I appreciate you being here, but now I have to do this, and this is why." And in the book, he talked about not feeling guilty, right? Like, I'm not going to feel guilty because you have bad feelings. Right? How many of you struggle sometimes when people have bad feelings towards you? Like maybe you're letting them down or disappointing them because you're not meeting a certain need in their life, or because you chose a different direction, or because you didn't come sit down with them at lunch, or they didn't get to come to an event with you. And all of a sudden they get these bad emotions in themselves, and then you start feeling bad over it. I love in the book he talks about the law of power. And the idea there is I don't have to feel bad. In fact, I can't control your feelings. And I'm not going to be a slave to your feelings. When I have a border and I have a boundary and I value what God has put into my life, I'm not going to exhaust myself to try to take ownership over your emotions. And people that don't get this, they end up getting on the roller coaster ride of other people's emotions. And I got to tell you, it'll wear you out trying to make somebody happy all day long. Remember this: it's not your responsibility, and it's not my responsibility to make other people happy. Happiness is an inside job. They are in control of their attitude, their beliefs, and their emotions. I am in control with mine. And having a healthy self-disposition and boundaries around yourself makes a huge difference. So, boundaries, they're both invisible and visible boundaries. Sometimes we have, how about this? A particular boundary that came up in our family yesterday, as early as yesterday. And it was one of the children had a job to do, and they were got a job. They were asked to do something. They were working, and they were invited into this working environment. And then a friend texted and said, "Can I do this? I want to go be a part of that." And because it wasn't my child's responsibility or jurisdiction to say yes, she said, "No, I don't have the authorization to allow you to come into this employment blessing opportunity." And what that was, I felt like it was a clear delineation on what is her role and what is not her role. See, it's always the employer's job in that situation to invite somebody into that employment relationship. And if every employee just says yes to all their friends because they want to hang out, it ruins the environment of the situation. And so she had to say, "No, you can't come. This is just for just a select few." And what we have to deal with in that is you have to be willing to disappoint somebody else's emotions so you can keep good responsibility with your employer in that situation. Josh, can you speak into a little bit of a situation that maybe perhaps people start bringing their kids to work and it starts causing problems, and they never checked with you, and then what has to happen to discipline that type of employee that doesn't respect those boundaries?
Sure, yeah. Well, recently, speaking of kids and people bringing in their kids, we let our employees, if there's a situation that they have no babysitting or whatever, they can bring them in. But not to be like abused. So, but this one, Justin and I were in the office working, and the kids were in the conference room, which is right next to our office, and they would just jump up and down and banging on the walls, and it was disrupting the whole office. And we were kind of looking around like, she noticed that her kids were going crazy in there and waiting around. And then finally we had to go in ourselves and say, hey guys, you need to knock it off, calm down, be quiet, because the employee wasn't doing that. They weren't taking care of their own responsibilities. So that was a situation we had to step in and do it for them.
Yes.
So sometimes people can't, they don't realize what's going on, and then you gotta kind of step in the situation.
Yes. And the reason this happens now, it's not just one location. It's in multiple locations where invisible boundaries get crossed, and somebody doesn't have the courage and the fortitude to be able to step in and say, we need to correct this situation. See, what happens if you don't correct a situation where a border has been broken is it messes up the business, and then other people feel disrespected because they can't do their job, and there's lawlessness. And so the same thing happens in homes, in families. How many of you have had any altercations and confrontations with maybe a sibling or a spouse or a neighbor because maybe somebody's being too loud or somebody's leaving their trash on the floor, and they're breaking boundaries and causing harm inside the dynamic and the culture inside in which you live? And if somebody doesn't step into it, if there's no courage and order, it just falls into chaos. And it can't go that way, because then everybody has problems and it falls apart. So you have to be able to step into it and say, no, we don't leave our crap on the ground. We put it away. And do you know how that makes me feel when I have to come in and clean up after you all the time? Or do you understand by your kids running amok and running all over and throwing stuff over the church or at the office or whatever, how that impacts the whole environment? See, if you don't do your job right by taking ownership of your responsibility, then I have to step in when you're in my jurisdiction. And so stepping into that stuff is so important. My question to our group here is this: why don't we step into it? What are some of the reasons we don't step into it? Let me pass it off. Amy, raise your hand.
I don't step into it. I'm afraid. I'm afraid of people to not like me. You know, you want approval and you want people to, you to be the easygoing one to do it. And you're afraid of what people are going to think of you. You're afraid that that's going to turn into, someone talking about you behind your back, or she didn't let me do this, and she's the mean one. No one wants to fall into that category. But at the same time, you can turn it into being the one is respected, and you've done in the right spirit. It can be a very successful part of your relationship. So.
Amen. I love that.
Amos?
Okay. So, Amos, why don't you speak into this thought of the positives of stepping into a situation when you're fearful or apprehensive of how it's going to go down? What are the benefits of it?
Well, in my personal life, one of the things that I've been learning, and still am very much learning, is that since I just got married with Jessica, that one of the things this book pointed out to me is that each of us have our own specific God-given boundaries that work perfectly with who we are as a person. And so learning who you are and your identity with God and how He made you is super important. But then when He attaches you to another person, what I wanted to do immediately was go, well, you submit to my boundaries, right?
Yeah.
This is what I'm used to, right? This is my boundaries, this is how we do it. And then obviously that didn't work. So like, it's
and she said, I'm the old man.
but just learning step by step that she has her specific boundaries that God had made for her, and God made His specific boundaries for me, and then He wants us to learn to find out what are our boundaries together. And I found out that the more that I submit to His boundaries for me and for us, the positives are so much greater, and that's where real harmony comes in line, is when I find out what He wants for us and not me deciding what's our boundaries.
Amen. So good. So good. I think there's a few more that are trying to come in on
Deanne.
on our Zoom, and so I think there's a few more. Yep, Deanne is coming in. Awesome. We welcome you, Deanne. And anybody else that wants to join us on Zoom, feel free to do so. I'm going to check the chat right now to see if there's anybody that has any questions or comments. Nahimi said, one thing I got out of chapter 2 is the freedom to say yes or no to what we allow in our fence. Great thought. We have the freedom to keep the positive relationship and also allow ourselves to avoid toxic ones. And I love that thought because he talked about in the book how if you're in a relationship and all of a sudden, like let's say you're married and the guy or the lady is beating you or drunk every night or causing a lot of damage. He talked a lot about like, putting boundaries up and borders with consequences and being able to say no to the toxic. And you know how many people stay in broken churches, broken marriages, broken businesses because of this dependence that they have. What are the other people going to think of me? And not being willing to say, no, this is a toxic relationship. I'm pushing this out. Or on the flip side, being able to say, no, this is good for me. And to be able to say, I'm letting this into me because this is so, so helpful. And so that's a great observation, Nahimi, on what you're saying in the fence with the gate. Amos, you brought up a great point on inside of a relationship, when you get married, he spoke about this as well, you become one. But that oneness doesn't dissolve personhood. And I thought that was such a fantastic point. I may be getting ahead of the game a little bit on this. But like, for example, my wife, she still has her own individual uniqueness, her own personhood, and she still has to be able to have her own emotional build-up time, things that she enjoys, and to be able to build her up and vice versa. So I thought that was a great communication. And then to be sensitive to it. He talked about in the book, it's not just bless God, you do what I say, and no, there's something in there of living in grace and freedom. So that was some good stuff. Let's go into chapter number 3. Does anybody else have, it looks like Diego Cervantes. I don't know who that is, but I'm going to let him in. You know who he is?
Yes, sir.
Okay, awesome. You're admitted. Awesome. Welcome to the chat. If you have, guys on Zoom, if you have any comments or Instagram or Facebook from any of the chapters or stuff that you're gleaning, please feel free to communicate.
Brandy just asked if you can give some example of what speaking into that looks like. I think what you were just talking about the Nohimi comment.
Can you clarify if it's the Nohimi comment or if it's the personhood comment? And we will speak into anything you guys want us to speak into. We'll go ahead and do that.
I got something too. Talking about the fence line, like I think of your house. If you have a fence around your yard, what does that do? It shows what's yours. Anything on the inside of that fence is mine. I'm responsible for that. And on the outside of the fence, I'm not responsible for that. That's somebody else's property. And then also, like if you have a tree that's right on the border of your fence, and the neighbor's trees coming over to your yard and dropping a bunch of leaves and junk down on it, what are you going to go chop that thing off? You can't cut theirs, but you can cut what's hanging over on your side. And then, but also sometimes there's a tree that's making a lot of shade, but it's the neighbor's, and it's creating. You like it. You like the shadiness, like the from the sun blocking the sun, and it feels good. So you'll invite that. You like that part. Sometimes you got to cut it off. Sometimes you let it go, and then you can benefit from it. So that's kind of what I thought about when I was thinking about boundaries.
Good. Anybody else want to speak into that?
So, boundary cut.
Yeah, I like the illustration he brought up in the book on the thought of, can you imagine you have a house and a yard, and your water flow is watering the neighbor's yard, and like you're giving away everything to somebody else, but then you look at your own house, you look at your own yard, and there's no grass, it's dead, it's dry, and then you get upset because their stuff is nice and your stuff is not nice. And a lot of that has to do with you're taking on responsibility for what's not yours. And then you feel guilty for doing what's yours. And the simple fix there is, no, I'm going to repipe this flow to water my grass. This is my life, my grass, this is my fence. And then when the neighbor comes and they're all mad because you're not watering their lawn anymore, you're like, listen, this is mine. That is yours. You take care of what's yours. I take care of what's mine. And I'll not feel bad about it. So, love the illustration on the fence. Did Brandy clarify what she wanted?
She just said just practical examples of how to actually say things in the right way.
Okay. So, let's go up to chapter 3 and then we'll answer that question. Practical ways to say things in the right way, because we don't want to be a bunch of jerks like, hey, you nuisance neighbor, what's wrong with you, So chapter 3 is boundary problems, and the idea is we say yes to the bad and no to the good, and then there's compliance where you're just compliant with everybody. Well, I'm just saying yes to everything, and I'm but I mean no. And then on the flip side, getting controlled, I say no to the good. So how do we deal with those boundary problems, and how do we emotionally, intellectually speak the truth in love? Amos wants to take it.
Well, I first wanted to say the way not to do it, because I wanted one of the things that he talked about was the different types of controllers at the end there of chapter 3, and I realized for me, mine is definitely the manipulative controller, and that's.
I thought so. I thought so.
That's the
We
way.
all thought it when we read that.
No, you didn't.
What you thought was I was wonderful.
But, no, that's definitely a way not to do it. But I just personal confession, I can see that in me where I justify myself getting them to do what I want because I'll say, well, they said they wanted to do it, but it was me really controlling it through a manipulative way. So that's a way not to do it. For me, honestly, the best, like when I receive feedback about boundaries or things I should or should not do, and when I've given it, the best way that it's always been received is just sit down with them. It's clear, it's clarified, and just given with so much like complete love and kindness. And you sit down and take the time.
Yes.
And you don't do it through a text. You don't do it through like a brush off. You don't do it through yelling. You don't do it through manipulation. You just sit down, be completely honest with them, take the time to walk through each step of it, and just be kind through it all. And if you've already built up a relationship with them beforehand, all of that will come across super well, and they'll get to receive it.
Amen. I think another thing will be very helpful in the communication when you're dealing with boundary problems and people feel like they want to get their way and they want you to be happy with whatever they want, but you're trying to stand up and speak into it, and you're dealing with a very strong, powerful person, even a person that you love, right? Being able to use the repeat method to slow the conversation and to pull the emotional tension out of the communication. When they are speaking, what you do is you listen to them and then you say, so I think what you're saying is this. And you're repeating what they're saying so they can hear it. So that way you're able to really find out, is that what you're saying? And then after you clarify that both you heard what they said, they confirmed what they said, then you're able to add on top of that, well, if I was to do this, like what you're saying, here's what it does to me. And it would put me in a really bad position and would cause me to break a major boundary for my life. And while I would be serving you in this area, this is how it harms me. And this is how it puts my family at a disadvantage. This is how it hurts the ministry or the church. And now what you're able to do is clarify what they wanted and how it harms you and how it violates a boundary, a law of love, that they may not all the way get. So going slow enough to repeat what they're asking for and clarifying what it would do to you, and then ask them, do you see now how that would hinder or hurt me? And how that would maybe put my family at a disadvantage. And like, for example, if I say yes to going with you on this this appointment, I already had an appointment set or this time slot with my spouse or my kids. And so by saying yes to you on this and giving you what you want, I won't be able to have this time that I had preset with my family. And I know that this is so important for the long-term benefit. And I think as people know that they're heard and you're able to communicate from your heart how if you said yes to them, it would hurt you and eventually hurt them and hurt the relationship, they will be a lot more inclined to concede to your point. That's if you want to go slower and help them to understand it. There are times you go slower to help them understand, and there's other times that you don't necessarily have to go all the way slow. You just say, no, this is in order to help my family or do this is what I've got to do. So does anybody want to add on to that? Any comments? Amos does, okay.
Kristen has a question.
Go ahead.
Miss Kristen asked, what are thoughts on when people calling you controlling and are calling you controlling and rude, but in reality you're having boundaries for yourself? I think we touched on this a little bit earlier about there does need to be a sense of not being a slave to other people's emotions and feelings. But at the same time, there also needs to be, I think it's later on in chapter 4 or so, where it talks about, or 5, where it talks about evaluation. And he just says, just because you have set boundaries and you do need to be secure in the identity of those boundaries, it's also important to make sure you evaluate people's responses just to be self-aware about whether those boundaries have moved into a direction of selfishness or just anger towards other people, and evaluating if it's not. Sometimes people, no matter how kind and how loving you are with your boundaries, they're just always going to have a bad reaction. You can't feel the guilt of that, but at the same time, it's important to evaluate and just make sure that you are on the right with the Lord between you and that person.
Amen.
Those boundaries.
Yeah, and I think I would add to this as well. I'm going to add a few more people that are in the waiting room. Jose Sanchez and Sanchez Uria Frank. So we'll just go ahead and admit them. Welcome to the meeting, guys. I think one of the things that I would say all of us struggle with is when people don't respond the way we want them to respond. And we have a tendency, I think, as human beings, to want love from people and want them to see it our way. But then when they don't do it the way we want them to do it, when we want them to do it, we have these ill feelings on the inside of us, and then we begin to somewhat come across hard, either passive aggressive or straight aggressive. And then instead of it causing them to come close to us, they put up bigger walls. And then no amount of communication that comes in is going to penetrate those walls because they built up defenses, because now we are terrorizing them in trying to get them to do something we want them to do. In the book, he talks about, there's a lot more people wanting to join now. So we'll just add them all in. Welcome. And, when that happens, you can't expect to get love from somebody that you are terrorizing. And James 4 talks about this. He talks about how, let's see here. I'm admitting all the people, but I don't know how to mute everybody. So maybe somebody can help me with making sure we're muting everybody. Here, will you make sure we're muting everybody? Just keep the phone on me, though. So back to what I was saying was, James 4 talks about we desire to have, but we cannot obtain. You think about this. When you want something so bad from the deepest part of your heart, and nothing you do is working, and you just try to grab at it more to try to force a decision, you're coming from a place of insecurity. You're coming from a spot of, I gotta have it. And what happens is it pushes them away. And then we begin to make them feel guilty for not doing what we want them to do. And even though it starts with, I want to have these boundaries and I want us to cohabitate, if it comes across hard, we start terrorizing. The Bible would talk about it this way: a brawling woman in a wide house. Better to dwell on that rooftop than with a brawling woman in a housetop. Why? Because the contention, the continual drip. And if we're nitpicky, in order to bring somebody in a boundary, we're doing it the wrong way. Does that make sense? So back to, how do I do it? You come from a place of love and communication, and you come from a place of, this is what I'm feeling, this is what I'm thinking, and this is what I'm hoping, and I want to make this right, and I'm willing to give you the time you need to be able to process it. So I just saw that thought, and I thought, man, that's so good.
Rochelle had a question.
Who does?
Rochelle.
Okay, go ahead.
Just when you were talking about when you're trying to tell people why you can't do stuff with them because of your family or whatever, she said, what about if it's not something that will hinder me or my family, but it's just something I don't want to do?
Yeah.
Good. Okay, so here's the question. Somebody's asking me to do something that I don't want to do. It's not going to hinder me. It's not going to hurt me. But I just don't want to do it. Who wants to take it? I'll start speaking into it, but I want to see if somebody else wants to speak
I
into
want
it.
to know the answer.
Okay. So I'll wait until Daniel can actually fix that before we answer it.
I think a lot of times for me, like, I don't want to have to give an explanation. You know, like when is that necessary to give an explanation when it's just like, I'm sorry, I can't. Like, I don't always want to have to explain why I can't. I just can't. Like, you don't, even if it's something that there is a good reason, I just don't feel like you need to know those details.
Yeah.
But then does that come across as rude because I'm not giving you a reason?
No, I think if somebody is forcing your hand and trying to make you to do something that you don't want to do, that's not a long-term relationship, or it's a very selfish relationship. And somebody that respects you is going to appreciate a boundary in your life. They're not going to ask you to break a boundary that you've set up for your own protection. Whereas somebody who doesn't respect you, somebody who is manipulative, who is using self-pity to try to gain, advantage or cause you to do something that you don't want to do that'll harm you or harm others, that's an absolute person you have to be able to say no to. And yes, there are times for their own edification, you explain to them why. And then there's other times you don't explain. Like Jesus would say this, I have many things to say unto you, but you can't bear them now. And so being able to say, listen, there's a reason I can't do this, and I have family, I have work, I have this, but the answer is no. And maybe there's some things I want to share with you, I just can't share with you right now. It's just not time for it. Or there's some private reasons. And you'll find this to be true inside ministry and family and business. Sometimes people are so selfish that they pry and they pry and they pry. And when people begin to pry information that doesn't belong to them, what you do is you say, this doesn't belong to you. This is not given to you. Jesus would say this to his disciples. It is given to you to know the mysteries of the kingdom of God, but to them it is not given. And so sometimes people will be like, well, why wasn't I invited? Why wasn't I getting this? And you have to be able to say, it just wasn't given to you. It wasn't for you. This was an exclusive meeting just for them. Perhaps you'll have in the teenagers, you'll have in the staff, you'll have in the work. And it's a tough pill to swallow when people really want to be included, but it's not given to them. And so you just have to be able to stand into it and say, this is who we selected and this is why. Amy, you want to speak into it?
I just have a question. Explain this for me. What about if you take a scoreboard method to it? Like this person's kind of jumped in for you and helped you out 10 times in the last so long.
Good
and
question.
You kind of owe them one. You're trailing in the scoreboard.
I love it.
And is this a guilt thing now? Now am I doing this out of guilt? Or is it me trying to be a better friend and I need to step it up a little bit?
Great question. Okay, so Amy's asking a classic question that here's what's competing. The law of reciprocity is competing with the law of love, right? So reciprocity is I do this for you, you do that for me. And there's a place for it, but a higher law that we should all operate from is the law of love. I do this for you without any strings attached. I'm not going to be a scorekeeper, but I'm going to be a grace giver, okay? And a grace giver doesn't mean that I have to do everything you say that you want to do when you want to do it, because that's manipulation. I get to choose when I want to give, when I want to love, and when I want to serve, right? So realizing that, yes, people do stuff for us all the time. But if they're doing it out of the law of love, then great. They won't expect strings attached. Here's how you can tell if somebody is doing it out of reciprocity. They will guilt you. I did this for you, you. How can I give you an illustration of this? I don't want to give any disrespect to the person that did this, so I'll kind of keep it vague. But I would often get gifts from somebody, and then I'd receive those gifts. And then she would, I did this, and this for you. And she would almost use the gifts as a form of manipulation and bribery in order to extract what she wanted, when she wanted, how she wanted, and with whom she wanted. And then I eventually got wise to it, and I thought, she's using bribery. she's trying to buy me. I can't be bought. No, right? Nobody buys me but Jesus Christ. And then I had to realize I had to put up a boundary and a border to be able to. And then before I would ever receive a gift from her again, I would say, now this is a gift, right? And that you're giving this out of love, right? Yep. And even though she wasn't able to fully comprehend what she was doing, I had to clarify in my own mind that, okay, when I receive something, I just have to know that's her MO. And then when she would ask for something, when she'd ask for it, I would not fall into that trap. I would choose on my own to say, I operate from the law of love, and I will give as I see fit, not as you see fit. And I don't have to measure up to what you want when you want. And here's what would happen. She would quickly learn there's a boundary there that I put in place for my own protection. And then she realized she can't control me in this situation. And this was many, many years ago. And even now today, I'm benefited because there's a boundary there. And now still today, you can tell if somebody's operating off the law of reciprocity because they're going to guilt you when you say no. And so back to the original question, when you want to say no and they're forcing a yes, it's because they don't value, respect, and appreciate you, especially if you have a boundary there. And we all have to be strong enough to be able to say, no means no. Just because everybody else is going to this event or to this ministry thing or to this doesn't mean I have to. What is that to thee, Jesus would say, follow thou me. And building up enough personal strength to be able to say, I am one person, I don't have to be in every place at once, and just doing it doesn't mean I have to do it. And so being able to have that conviction inside yourself and losing the fear of man, because that's really what it is how do I say no even though when I feel like I have to say yes? That feeling of having to say yes is rooted in the fear of man. I want people to like me. I don't want people to be upset at me. You just have to be built up in courage and to be able to say no. And if the only reason you love me and you're for me is because I always say yes to you, then I'm not teaching you what real love is. I'm falling into your trap. And I'm not going to sit here and be the slave to all of your emotions. And that's the real secret, is putting those boundaries together. Amos wants to speak. You want to do it? Go ahead, Trevor, and then Amos.
Okay. Well, I just thought it was a good point for the quote that is in the book. It says the inability to say no to the bad is pervasive. Not only does it keep us from refusing evil in our lives, it often keeps us from recognizing the evil. I thought it was a good illustration of, like, now that you've said no to the bad influence, and now you can recognize that a lot easier and more often throughout throughout your life stages. So I just wanted to point out that quote.
Good point. Good point. Take it to Amos if you would.
I think that other question about what if I am fully capable of doing it, I have time to do it, it's just not something I want to do. I think there's no perfect answer, as in, like, there's no black and white, these are the lines. I think it's subjective, and it has to be, I think you have to have a close relationship with God. I think about David, where he was constantly going back to the Lord. Should we go up? Should we do this? Should we do that? And even Jesus, right, when he was having a hard time. When he was in the garden praying, sweating drops of blood, saying, Lord, can this cup pass from me? And God said, you're going to do it. And he said, nevertheless, not my will, but thine. And so there is an element, I think, of if you feel like you're set, you have an overflow in your life, you're not doing this out of guilt and you're not doing it out of shame or anything like that, but it's just not something you usually like to do, but it's there and it's available, that's when I think you have to look at, is this within the boundaries God has given me and not just something I personally like? And so I think it's a case-by-case basis, and you don't have to say yes to everything, definitely. But I think it was Rochelle who was asking, it's what if it's just things that I totally can do and I have time for. I don't really like to do it. If I always said no to those things, then I probably would many times be missing out on blessings that God has for me, because I don't want to go soul winning today at 2 p.m. or whatever.
Yeah, good point. So I think there's something to be said for both saying no to things that you don't want to do, but then on the flip side, being willing to say yes to things that you don't want to do if it's going to minister love and grace to somebody else. Because let's face it, there's a lot of appointments that I really don't want to go to or don't want to be a part of. But I do it because I love that person. I don't do it out of guilt, fear, or manipulation. I do it because I want to esteem that person. I want to bless that person. I want to show some measure of care to that person. So there's a fence with a gate that you're kind of being able to go back and forth on and be able to be a Christian servant. But it's not to be used as a manipulation tool. I do want to add this point in. We don't want to create boundaries out of spite and manipulation. There's a place for drawing back for health and emotional regaining of support and energy, but we also don't want to be the person that says, oh, I'm never going to go to this church, or never going to get married again, or I'm never going to visit this because of this situation in the past. Now you haven't really forgiven, and you're operating out of a self-protection mechanism, which is actually hurting the heart. And so in the book, he talks about the difference between forgiveness and reconciliation. We always forgive because of who we are, but that doesn't mean that you trust a person, and there still needs to be some reconciliation. I thought that was a great point. So I think we're at an hour now. I think that was our game plan. We covered, I think, 3 of the 4 chapters, and so I hope you guys will read the 10 laws on your own. There's so much rich content in that. And also chapter 6 on boundary myths. Phenomenal on all the myths inside there. Was this helpful for you guys?
Brittany
Awesome.
said, I am loving this discussion.
She is.
Yes.
Awesome. I do want to check the comments before I jump off here.
Yeah.
And
That's it.
I do want to see where the chat is, see if anybody communicated. Doesn't look like there's any communication on the Zoom. So thank you guys for this. I want to encourage you, read part 2, listen to part 2. Be ready. Be ready when you come to this meeting to add value. So if you took a note when I'm on that chapter, be ready to bring up that thought and dialogue over it. And then also be ready if somebody says something that you're like, man, that's good. Can you expand into it or speak into it more? Feel free to jump into it. Remember, all of us together are better and wiser than one of us on our own. So we want to have that collective wisdom around the table. And hopefully, Lord willing, all of us have been made better through this discussion. Amen? All right, let's pray and we'll be dismissed. Father, thank you so much for everybody who